I caught him at 3:07 a.m. The glow from his phone screen danced across his face like a thief illuminated mid-crime. He thought I was asleep. He thought he could copy my bank login, drain everything, and I'd wake up powerless. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd seen this betrayal coming months ago, and I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply watched. Because while he played checkers, I built a system, a silent, invisible fortress. And by the time he logged in, his access wasn't just gone, it never existed. They told me I was the luckiest woman alive. A thriving career in cybersecurity, a charming husband, a house that overlooked the city skyline, and in-laws who, by all outward appearances, adored me. At Sunday dinners, Mark's mother would squeeze my hand and say, "If it weren't for you, Mark would still be selling insurance out of a basement. You're the best thing that's ever happened to this family." I believed her. I needed to. Because after years of building firewalls to keep the world's worst people out, it felt good to finally let someone in. Mark and I met during a keynote I gave on data integrity at a fintech summit. He asked a smart question. I gave a sharp answer. He smiled. I smiled. It seemed easy, right? Natural. The chemistry became a relationship, then a proposal, then a wedding under string lights in Napa. I didn't even hesitate when I rewrote his business infrastructure from the ground up, launching his firm into a new tax bracket. I didn't mind that everything was under his name. What mattered was the foundation we were building. Together. The house we moved into had a strange echo when it was empty, so I filled it with rugs, sound-absorbing panels, even a piano I couldn't play. I told myself I was nesting, that I was turning a property into a home. I ignored the subtle slights, the way Mark flinched when I logged into our joint accounts, or how his sister always made jokes about nerdy control freaks. I let it slide when my mother-in-law once said, half laughing, "It's nice that you're the smart one. Pretty women usually aren't." I smiled. I played my role. I told myself they didn't mean harm, and even if they did, so what? I was winning. Then came the night I woke to silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that feels staged, manufactured. I opened one eye and saw the faint glow of our living room light seeping beneath the door. My heart didn't jump. It froze. I slipped out of bed, barefoot on the cool wood floor, and followed the soundless thread that led me to the office. There he was. Mark. Back turned to me. Phone in one hand, my laptop open in the other. He didn't notice me. He was too focused, squinting at the screen, adjusting the angle of his phone. Snap, another photo. Snap, another screen. Each snapshot a violation, each click a betrayal. I didn't interrupt. I didn't ask why. I just walked away. Back to bed. Heart a vacuum. At 9 a.m., Mark made me coffee, kissed my forehead, told me I looked tired. I thanked him. I smiled. Then I poured the coffee down the sink the moment he left for work, sat at my desk, logged into the admin console I never told him existed. The air was still. My fingers didn't tremble. They moved with precision, familiarity. Line by line, I activated the sequence I'd created years ago, but never thought I'd use. Protocol Exodus, initiated, 3 words. That was all it took. Within seconds, the dominoes began to fall. Every major asset, every silent investment, every layered alias began to shift. Offshore accounts realigned, holding companies restructured, shell corporations reflagged. The digital world where I kept the real version of my life began its migration, vanishing from his view like mist in morning sun. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just recalculated. And yet the deeper hurt wasn't the theft, it was the choreography of it all. The practiced way he moved through my files, the confidence, as if this wasn't the first time, as if someone had walked him through it. That's when I checked the camera in the hallway, the one hidden behind the bookshelf no one ever dusted. The footage was clear. The night before last, when I had dinner with my in-laws, Mark had left the room. Minutes later, his mother followed. She stood by the door, whispering something. I watched as she handed him a small USB, kissed his cheek, smiled. "If you get it right," she said, "you'll never have to answer to her again." I stared at the screen until it burned into my eyes. My pulse didn't quicken. It slowed, like my body had entered survival mode. So that was it. They weren't just trying to leave me, they were trying to erase me. Not today, not ever. The next morning I made pancakes. Blueberry, just the way Mark liked them. The scent filled the kitchen, warm and soft, as if it could smooth over the jagged edges of what I'd discovered. Mark walked in, hair tousled from sleep, fake yawn, fake stretch, fake smile. He kissed my cheek. I smiled back. A perfect scene, the perfect lie. He glanced toward the counter where my laptop sat closed. I watched his eyes, curious, cautious. He thought he'd gotten away with it. Thought I hadn't noticed. Thought the photos he took at 3 a.m. had given him power. But what he didn't know, what no one in that house could possibly imagine, was that every account he'd accessed no longer existed in the way he understood them. My bank dashboards now showed shadow data, dummy fronts. Each balance reflected a fraction of what was truly there, looped through encrypted visualizations that could only be decrypted through keys tied to my biometric profile and offline tokens. Even if he managed to break the encryption, all he'd see was noise, numbers without meaning, routes without destinations. Later that day, I sat across from my mother-in-law on the patio. She poured us both lemonade. She was wearing her pearl earrings, the ones she claimed were a family heirloom, but had actually been bought at a department store 2 Christmases ago. She smiled and said, "You always make things look so effortless, Rachel. I've never seen a woman handle a household and a career so gracefully." Her voice dripped with performance. I nodded, offered a soft "thank you," and asked if she wanted more sugar. Inside, Mark sat on the couch pretending to read, but I saw the way his thumb hovered over his phone. He was logging in again, checking the account he thought he'd unlocked. I gave him nothing to react to, and that only made his confusion sharper. When his brow furrowed, when he glanced up at me with feigned calm, I knew the illusion was working. He thought I was losing control, but I was simply changing form. Have you ever felt like you were being erased from your own life? Like the people around you were writing over your name with ink so faint they assumed you wouldn't notice? That's what they were trying to do to me. Phase me out, make me a ghost with a smile. But I wasn't the ghost. I was the architect. Months before, a client came to me in tears. Not about money, about fear. She was divorcing a man with connections, political ones, and she needed to vanish. Not physically, but financially. She asked if I could build her a digital sanctuary, a firewall not just of code, but of identity. I said no. Then I watched her walk away, shoulders hunched under the weight of helplessness. 2 days later, I called her back. I told her I'd been working on something, a theory, and maybe it was time to test it. Together, we built it. A lattice of shell companies, cryptocurrency obfuscators, anonymous holding trusts, and triple-layered offshore redirection systems. Accounts in Iceland under a frozen seafood export company. A Malaysian textile firm that didn't sell a single thread. Estonian e-residency entities, managed by AI proxies. The money flowed not like water, but like vapor, touchable only if you understood its temperature, its pressure points, its invisibility. She escaped, and I kept the blueprint. So when I typed "Protocol Exodus Initiated," I wasn't just protecting what was mine. I was activating the system I once gave to another woman in need. Only this time, the woman was me. Over the following days, I stopped answering Mark's questions directly. When he asked about utilities, I handed him a spreadsheet. When he brought up mortgage payments, I told him I'd move them to a different calendar. He didn't push too hard yet, but I could sense his unease. One evening, I pretended to nap on the couch. I left my tablet unlocked beside me. I knew he'd take the bait. He did. He tiptoed over, careful not to breathe too loudly. His fingers hovered above the screen. Click, click, click. I'd programmed every touch point to log his activity in the background. He was trying to find the accounts again, tracing transactions. But everything led to dead ends, empty branches, accounts closed months ago or leading to foundations he'd never heard of. I'd rebuilt myself into a system he couldn't trace. But hiding the money wasn't the real game. I was removing myself entirely from the network, dismantling the links between my identity and every asset I'd ever held. A full digital reset, no credit score, no loan history, no taxable record in our shared geography. By the time this ended, I wouldn't just be financially unreachable, I'd be legally invisible. The last thing I ever bought under my real name was a USB drive with a titanium casing. I backed up the final key, then I burned the receipt. That night, as Mark lay beside me, scrolling through his phone with irritation masked as boredom, I turned away and stared at the ceiling. He thinks he still has time, that I'm playing some emotional game, that I'm angry or hurt or trying to guilt him into confession. But this isn't about guilt, it's about power. And tomorrow, when he wakes up and sees that the credit cards are no longer functioning, that the utilities are rerouted, that the business account requires biometric verification he'll never pass, he won't rage, he'll panic, and then he'll understand. But by then, I won't be there. Because ghosts don't linger where they're not seen. They rebuild empires in the shadows. Mark arrived at the cafe in a suit he hadn't worn since our wedding. He brought his lawyer, young, eager, dressed in a confidence too large for his frame. I wore a gray blouse and no jewelry, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted them to wonder if I had already sold everything. Mark began with a smile, a performance. "Rachel," he said, "I think we can do this peacefully. No need to drag things through court." His lawyer nodded in agreement, sliding a neat folder toward me. "We're offering a clean split, half of the joint assets. He keeps the business, you keep the house. Fair. Fair." I opened the folder slowly, like I might consider it. My fingers traced the edge of the printed balance sheet. Every figure was wrong. Every asset they listed, every dollar, every deed, was a ghost. The house? Owned by a trust registered in Estonia? The car? Sold and replaced with a leased vehicle under an LLC? The accounts? Shadows that no longer connected to my name. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake," I said softly, handing the folder back. "Those aren't mine to give." Mark leaned forward, his voice cracking beneath his calm. "Rachel, don't play games. We know what you have." "No," I said, folding my hands. "You know what I let you see." The lawyer looked uncomfortable now. He tapped on his tablet, refreshed a screen. His brows furrowed. "Her name's not coming up in the database," he muttered. "No mortgage, no holdings, no employment listing under her SSN." Mark blinked. "What are you talking about?" "It's like she doesn't exist," the lawyer whispered. That was the moment I'd been waiting for. "Ghost protocol," I said. "Level 6. It was a term I made up, meant nothing, but it sounded real enough to silence them. They left with questions. Mark didn't even finish his coffee. That evening, I lit a single candle in the hallway, not for atmosphere, for silence. I turned off every light, sat in the shadows, and waited. The door slammed open. "You want to play dirty?" Mark's voice echoed down the hall. "Fine." He stormed into the living room, pacing, muttering. "She thinks she can erase everything? Rewrite reality?" But I'd already rewritten it, and he wasn't the only one unraveling. At dinner the next night, his mother slammed her glass on the table and shouted, "You were supposed to handle this. 5 years I coddled her, praised her, let her take credit for your company. For what?" Mark recoiled. "You told me she was weak." "She was," she spat. "But somehow you still lost control." "Lost control?" I said, stepping into the room. "You never had it." They froze. I held up a tiny black recorder, pressed play. Her voice, sharp and gleaming, filled the space. "Rachel was never family, just a tool. You praise the tool until the job's done, then you put it back in the drawer." Silence. I uploaded the recording that night to a private forum for corporate women, lawyers, CEOs, board directors, people who knew my work, people who didn't tolerate snakes in silk blouses. Within 48 hours, my mother-in-law received an email informing her she was being removed from the board of the local foundation she chaired. Another email arrived from her country club. Her membership had been reviewed and revoked. She left me 5 voicemails. None were returned, but I wasn't finished. Mark's company, his pride, his identity, ran on financials I helped create. Spreadsheets, revenue flow models, back-end payment gateways. I had access to every password, every transactional keystroke. Months ago, I inserted anomalies, not to destroy the company, but to ensure that when things turned ugly, I could turn up the heat, and I did. A compliance alert was triggered at his bank, then another, then a flag on a wire transfer to a vendor that didn't exist. Mark called me, frantic. The IRS is asking questions. Maybe you should talk to your accountant, I replied. You know, the one I recommended. The call ended in silence. He was unraveling. But this wasn't revenge. It was restoration. For 5 years, I made myself smaller so they could feel bigger, smiled at jokes that cut, ignored glances that sliced. They thought I was just a brilliant mind in service of a man's legacy, but I wasn't building his kingdom. I was learning where to place the explosives, and now I was just lighting fuses. The Reykjavik air bit at my skin like a reminder. I was somewhere new, somewhere real. I'd arrived 2 weeks earlier with 1 suitcase, 1 encrypted flash drive, and 0 traces of the name Rachel Mitchell. The customs agent glanced at the Estonian e-residency card I handed him, paused, then waved me through. He didn't know he was part of the final stage of my disappearance. No one did. The apartment was small, sparse. White walls, 1 window, no memories. But it was mine. Or rather, it belonged to the shell corporation I'd created under a pseudonym 2 years ago. It felt like stepping into a version of myself I'd only imagined, one without attachments, without surveillance, without expectation. I spent the first week in silence, not because I needed peace, but because I needed calibration, to realign every part of my mind after what I had burned down. I moved like a ghost, shopped at corner markets, paid in crypto, used signal jammers in my coat pockets. My life now existed across dozens of identities, each one layered like protective skin over the truth of who I'd been. But I hadn't come here just to escape. I came to build. The project was already in motion when I left the States, a private server farm buried beneath the ice fields, leased under a tech cooperative with no visible board of directors. Inside it, the Nexus Protocol, a system I designed to help women reclaim control over their digital and financial identities. No social security numbers, no banks, no courts, just encryption, anonymity, and liberation. They found me slowly, whispered messages on encrypted threads, burner phones passed between shelters, women with bruises not always on the skin. Each one came with a story, and each story added fuel to the engine I was building. Some asked how I knew so much. I never told them the full truth. But the truth was, I'd tested every method on myself, every redirect, every dead end, every silent asset transfer. I wasn't just teaching them how to disappear, I was the prototype. And then he found me. It was a Thursday. The air outside had turned metallic with snow. I was walking back from the server facility when I saw him, standing by the cafe across the street, coat zipped up to his chin, eyes scanning. For a moment, I thought it was a hallucination. But no. Mark. Hair longer, face thinner. His arrogance had melted into something desperate, hollow. I didn't stop walking. I turned a corner, slipped through an alley. 3 minutes later, I was behind him. "Mark," I said. He jumped, turned. "Rachel?" His voice cracked as if saying my name took more effort than expected. "That's not my name anymore," I replied. His eyes searched my face, like he was trying to piece together someone who'd once belonged to him. I just wanted to talk. "You crossed an ocean to talk?" I didn't know where else to go. And yet, I said, stepping closer, you still came to where I am, not to ask if I'm okay, but to see if there's anything left of me you can salvage. He didn't deny it, just dropped his gaze. I messed up, he said. You engineered betrayal, I corrected. You rehearsed it. I thought I could control it. I walked past him, opened the door to the cafe, held it open. He followed. Inside, the heat wrapped around us like a blanket. We sat in silence until our drinks arrived. He didn't touch his. I lost everything, he whispered. No, I said, sipping calmly. You only lost what wasn't yours to begin with. He looked up. How did you do it? I leaned forward, voice low. I built mirrors inside the system. Every time you looked at what you thought was my life, you were seeing a reflection I created for you. He swallowed hard. I took out my phone, showed him a screen with red markers blinking across a map. These, I said, are the women you never see. The ones who don't have time to wait for justice. I help them disappear, legally, financially, permanently. You're one of them? He asked. I turned the screen off. No, Mark, I'm not one of them. I pulled a small mirror from my bag, placed it between us. I'm the one who teaches them how. He stared at his reflection, distorted by the curve of the glass. Then I asked softly, do you even know who you stole from? The nightmares started with silence. Not screaming, not blood, not the flash of betrayal, but silence. Cold, absolute digital silence. A black terminal window, a blinking cursor, and then one line of code after another. Thousands, maybe millions, cascading down like a waterfall of language I once understood, but now couldn't stop. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart thudding like I was still being chased, but there was no one left to chase me. I had deleted them all. The problem with becoming untraceable is that you also become unreachable. In Iceland, no one knew my name. In the Nexus protocol, I had no voice. I worked behind layers of proxies, delegating my presence through encrypted avatars and AI-infused communications. I was everywhere and nowhere. I was safe. I was powerful. I was alone. I stopped answering calls from the women I helped. I told myself it was necessary. That emotional distance was a firewall, a kind of security. But in truth, I was losing the ability to care, to feel. Love had once been an axis I rotated around. Now it felt like static, like a soft sound I could no longer tune into. There was a man once, long before Mark. We met in grad school. We built code together, drank cheap wine in the lab, argued about logic trees like they were theology. He made me laugh. He made me believe I was someone worth seeing. When he left, he said it was because I had walls no one could climb. I didn't tell him the truth. The walls were there because I knew how fast people stop trying once they think they've won you. Now, in this life I had constructed, no walls remained, only void. If you could rewrite your past, would you let love survive? Or would you code around it like a vulnerability you were too afraid to patch? That was the question I couldn't answer, and it was already too late to try. The breach came at 3:41 a.m. A ping, an alert, not external, internal. One of our partner systems had attempted an unauthorized data pull on a dormant identity node. Normally, that wouldn't trigger a red flag, except the query used my original framework, the exact pattern I had written, a fingerprint I had shared with no one, unless I backtracked the origin, encrypted, masked, routed through dozens of clean tunnels. But I found the endpoint. Her name was Leda, one of the first women I helped. She'd come to me crying, bruised, terrified. She had sat across from me in a dark cafe, whispering about a man who used money as a leash, law as a weapon. I believed her. I gave her everything, tools, maps, strategies. I even let her glimpse the raw structure of the Nexus core, just enough to understand its gravity. Now she was using it, not to protect herself, but to claim it. The next 48 hours were a blur. Firewall after firewall, rebuild after rollback. She had managed to create a ghost network, nearly identical to mine, leveraging my architecture to siphon data from clients, reroute assets, and impersonate exit protocols. She wasn't just stealing, she was replicating. I stared at the logs, the digital residue of her betrayal. She hadn't even tried to hide it well. Part of her wanted me to see, to know. It hit me then, not like a knife, but like a mirror shattering in my chest. She had become me, or the version of me that never stopped running, never stopped calculating, never looked back. If I let her continue, she would expose every woman I had tried to protect. If I fought her, I would have to use the same tools, same tricks, same ruthless logic. I would become her to stop her. I would become Mark. I didn't shut her down. I shut down everything. At 5:03 a.m., I initiated a full-scale collapse. Protocol 0. The kill switch. Nexus protocol ceased to exist. Every vault, every mirror identity, every phantom transaction, gone. The women I had helped would remain protected, insulated in their final positions. But the system itself would never be used again. Not by me, not by anyone. The server went dark. For the first time in 2 years, I opened the curtains in my apartment. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the snow glowed faint blue under the moon. I pressed my hand to the window and breathed, steady and full. There would be no more avatars, no more encrypted whispers, no more digital dominion. It was over. Not because I had lost, but because I had won just enough to see where this road would end. It ends in solitude, in silence, in a cold room full of power and nothing to feel. And I wanted more than that. I wanted a life, even if I had to start from nothing, even if I had to use my real name. The envelope had yellowed with time, its corners frayed and edges soft like something held too many times to still be solid. It was the only thing I'd kept from my past that wasn't digitized, encrypted, or backed up. A letter from my mother, written in blue ink with wide, hesitant handwriting. I hadn't opened it in years, but I remembered every word. I don't know if this will reach you, but I hope one day you'll forgive me for leaving. I wanted to give you a better world, even if it meant not being in it. There was no return address, only a town name, Canton, Ohio, and a P.O. box number. That was enough. I arrived in late fall. The leaves had already turned to copper and red, swirling across the cracked sidewalks like whispers from the past. The house was small, pale green, porch swing, peeling white shutters. It looked like nothing had changed in decades. She opened the door slowly, eyes cautious, then wide, then wet. Rachel? I didn't correct her. I didn't say the new name I'd been using. I just nodded. She pulled me into her arms like the years between us had never happened. Her embrace smelled of soap, old linen, and a warmth I hadn't known since childhood. No passwords, no cameras, no need for surveillance, just two people standing in a doorway trying to make space for the things left unsaid. We ate dinner at a small wooden table. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, buttered corn. The kind of meal you only make when you believe in comfort. She told me stories about neighbors I didn't remember, about the church she still walked to every Sunday, about how she never quite figured out how email worked. I've never even had a smartphone, she laughed. Still have that flip phone you used to hate. I smiled, and for the first time in years, it was real. There was no performance, no code running in the background, no threat to anticipate, just presence. That night, I stood by her back window, watching the wind bend the trees, and I realized that in chasing absolute control, I had stripped away the one thing I needed most, connection without calculation. So I began writing. Not code, not commands, but words. A book, written in longhand first, then typed on a laptop with no internet access. I called it How to Disappear in a World That Sees Everything. A guide, yes, but more than that, a confession. I described the framework, the methods, the ethical minefields, But I also talked about the loneliness, the temptation to become cold steel in a soft world, and what it cost me. I wrote without naming myself. No author photo, no email for inquiries, just ink on paper and a final message that would only matter to the ones who truly needed it. If you're reading this, maybe you're thinking about vanishing. Maybe the weight of being seen, tracked, predicted has finally become too much. If that's true, know this: you don't have to disappear to survive. But if you do, don't just fade. Reappear, stronger. Reappear as someone who knows the power of being found and the wisdom of choosing when. I left the manuscript at a small press in Chicago that specialized in anonymous works. No royalties, no rights retained. I didn't want to be famous, I wanted to be useful. 1 month later, the book began circulating in corners of the internet I'd once lived in. Encrypted forums, closed chat groups, whispered networks. No one knew who wrote it. Some thought it was a former spy. Others guessed a victim-turned-hacker. None of them were wrong. The stories reached further than I imagined. One reader said it helped her escape a digital stalker. Another used it to start over after financial abuse. A third left a one-line review. "Thank you for teaching me that disappearing can be the beginning, not the end." I never responded, but I read every word. One night, I returned to the house in Ohio and sat on the porch with my mother. The stars overhead were unfiltered. No drones. No satellites I cared about, just light from another lifetime. She looked at me and said, "Are you staying this time?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Maybe not forever, but long enough to remember what it means to be found." We rocked together in silence. No code, no firewall, no trace. Just breath and dusk and the quiet certainty that the story had reached its end. Not because it stopped, but because I had chosen it to. And as I powered down the last device that still knew my real name, the screen flickered once, then went dark. No backups, no recovery, only peace.